that come to the table to help make these decisions. And that committee is comprised of both board members and community members, most of whom are former board members at the Community Foundation. And as we've been going through this process, as we've been turning the lens to ourselves as well, we've also been taking a deep dive into different particular areas. And so last year, we focused on health and human services and food insecurity, and really spent the year, as serendipity would have it, with Second Harvest and diving into their work. This year, our focus is on education and youth services, and we are taking that journey with Save Our Children and with College Now and with other education partners. And next year, we'll look at what the next phase will be as well, which is not to say, someone asked me at one point when we were talking about this and saying, oh, does that mean that your funding is going to shift to these particular areas? And no, that's not the case. It's that we are taking a deep dive in these areas to be able to understand what these partners are learning and how we can share that with our stakeholders and our donors. And in terms of what's informing our work, as many of you know, we have been establishing a community of practice. All of these organizations on here, I've spent time with, our team has spent time with. What I would add to here would be an organization called GEO, or Grant Makers for Effective Organizations. We're a member of theirs, but we've also entered into their cohort of their strategic learning and evaluation group. A couple members of our team are attending their learning conference, in fact, at the end of this month. So all this is to say that whether it's Lorain County or the region or nationwide, quite frankly, we are continuously trying to see how can we help our partners, how can we help ourselves, and in no way do we want to do any of this in a vacuum. And I'm going to pause again, as I want to reassure you that, you know, sometimes when we talk about evaluation, there are common concerns that come up, or sometimes people even call them myths. But, you know, common concerns might be, you know, well, why do we need to look at evaluation? You know, this is what we do. We've been doing it for decades. We're, you know, part of the leaders in our field. We know what our clients need. We know what this population needs. Why do we need evaluation? And I'm certain that probably not many folks in this group might think that, but I think it's always important that no matter how long we've been doing something, that we kind of step back and say, okay, well, what assumptions that have we made, or what orthodoxies are we operating from that may not be in fact true? And that's one of the things that evaluation does help us with. Another concern is sometimes people say, well, how are we going to measure this? And oftentimes this comes when there's such a large outcome that you have that maybe even a couple of years down the road. Well, how do you measure that? Well, we'll talk about that as we go through, because you have to break that down and you have to understand what your indicators are, and how can you start seeing that bridge from where your idea is now and where you want to go. Probably the biggest one we hear is, well, wait, and I understand completely, is we don't have the resources. How are we going to do this? You know, we may be volunteer run. We may be a smaller team. We may be, certainly with COVID and the pandemic, running up a host of other challenges that we need to put in to counteract. And we understand that completely. So we don't want this to be a complicated process. We want you to consider probably the data that you're already collecting in many cases, because this is the data that you would need to collect to be able to do the work that you're doing. We want you to consider, you know, is this something that when you look at your internship programs, if you look at resources that we have here in the county, whether it's Lorain County Community College, whether it's Oberlin College, to help you with data collection, or to help you to even have a conduit to walk alongside us. And I also want to make clear to folks that we want to hear from you. I mean, I don't want to hear from folks simply when you're applying for your application. We want to hear, you know, quarter of the way through, midway through, you know, what can we help you with? What ideas can we bring to you, and how can we help you along this process? And then finally, of course, the big concern is, well, what if we don't get it right? You know, what if, you know, in this case, the Community Foundation, what if the funder doesn't think this is the right piece? And I want to, and I'm sure that Linda's shared this with you, but I want to say that certainly when people set forth with their evaluation, what their outcomes are going to be, oftentimes you're not going to reach that outcome, and that's just fine. But that's one of the pieces of evaluation. So let's understand what was, if we've been collecting data, and we can know then whether something has been a change or whether that change has been an improvement. And we would say that all of these pieces are learning. So it's not really about, okay, did I hit the mark? Did I do this? Because if we are making sure that we are always evaluating that, you are absolutely going to get to where you're wanting to go. So I hope this also helps to allay any of those fears or concerns. And I want to start in some ways, I think probably for some folks, this is going to be going back to basics. And for some folks, I may be talking about things that you haven't necessarily worked with, and that's fine. We are hoping that we have a large group in terms of your viewpoint where you're coming at this. But I want to talk about your logic model and how this integrates with what we're doing. And if you aren't familiar with what a logic model is, that's just fine. It's essentially a graphic roadmap, if you will. Your logic model serves, I think, three purposes. One, it helps you with your program design, because how are you going to design your program to achieve the impact that you want? Two, it's going to help you to implement your program, because hopefully this is a living document that once you put in place, you're going back and you're revisiting and you're thinking about then your activities and your outputs and saying, okay, well, is this roadmap still right for us? How do we need to change it? And finally, your logic model is going to, in fact, of course, help with the valuation. And then that's where we come in. And that's where we would like for you to share these elements with us and to share your outputs and your outcomes and your impact. And what I think one of the things, the beauty of a logic model is that you can think of it, you see here on the screen that these arrows are going from left to right, or this was what might be called forward mapping, if you will. But really, probably sometimes it would be easiest to do backward mapping and start from the right, start from that number 5 and think, okay, here's what we want to achieve. Here's our impact. This is what we hope to affect in Lorain County and among our population. And then you've got to build backwards and say, okay, well, if that's the impact, what are some of the changes in behavior that we need to look at? And then you're going to look before that, because before you have a change in behavior, you always have to have a change in knowledge, right? So what's then the change in knowledge or awareness that we need to work on? What's our output? And our output, typically this is often the easiest, in my experience, it's easiest part for a nonprofit partner to put into their grant, because this is the work that you do. This is and quite frankly, the easiest thing to measure. This is the amount of meals you're delivering. This is the amount of classes that you are conducting. This is the amount of counseling sessions you're doing, the output, which then leads to the knowledge or the change in education or awareness, which then leads to a change in behavior, which is going to be your outcome, which is then going to lead to your impact. And if you start at the very beginning, of course, you need to think about what your resources are, how you're going to operate your program. This is your staff. This is then the activities you're using. And part of what's then not included on this logic model are some of your assumptions. And perhaps you probably need to test these. And then, of course, there's always going to be on the right-hand side your external environment and the things that you cannot change, whether it's policy, whether it is the constraints in your operating budget. All of these pieces go into your logic model. And I think what I would just impart to folks, and we'd be happy to share worksheets that have a logic model on it that are blank that you could fill in. But I think what's important to impart to folks is that you are looking at this to be important to have sort of your if-then statements, because you want to be able to essentially demonstrate the logic between the work that you're doing, then the activities that you're doing, the change in knowledge that you're achieving among a population, the change in behavior that you're achieving, and then finally your impact. And I have, some of you have seen this picture before. And in fact, one of my coworkers from, or colleagues rather, excuse me, from a foundation in the region, this is one of her favorite pieces, and then she shared it with me. And so I think that one of the new things that you've seen on our application questions and our evaluation component is asking about these outputs, our outcomes, and our measures of success. And I want to put this into this conversation here of something that's easy to understand. And if you think about making the pie, you know, you're going to make the pie, you've got the activity, and your output is that you have this pie. So your output is perhaps that you fed 12 people, that sort of thing. But your output is never your outcome. And this is where I see folks often get confused, is that, well, this is the work that we're measuring. We need to measure that we served this many meals, that we gave these many classes, that we provided this many counseling sessions. And while we do want to know that those things happened, that's not necessarily always the thing that you're measuring. You're measuring the behavior. You're measuring, if you look at the right-hand side here, you know, the fact that these girls graduated from a mentorship program. What are your indicators then going to be? Are they going to be looking at the social emotional health? Are they going to be looking at levels of confidence? Are they going to be looking at whether they were able to establish these girls to have mentorship relationships? Those behavior changes are really the outcomes, and that's a part of what we're looking at. And when you think about the question on the application, that's the measures of success, that's really the tool. What are you going to use to measure to know that you achieved those things, or in some cases didn't achieve them? And so what change needs to occur? Here I am breaking down this logic model, and if you think of it as sort of an outcome chain, if you will. So again, I know I'm restating things, but I've hopefully to drive this home, because sometimes, as I said before, it's easier. Some people like to work from the left to the right, the work we're going to do and where we're going to end up. And some people like to start from the backwards mapping and say, okay, well, here's the outcome that we want. We want to ensure that we are increasing attendance rates, or we are increasing literacy rates. And so then moving backwards to say, thinking about that if then, you know, what do I need to do to get to that place? So here, again, a pretty general example here. And to think about that, the providing the programming, and even once you quantify it and say, okay, it's going to be to 25 students, it's going to be in this school district, it's going to be for this many hours, that's your output. And we need to account for that. But what we're really looking for then are some of those indicators. Okay, are you able to talk to your group and to be able to understand, have you increased the study hours? You know, would you see a change in the test score? Do you see then, when you're looking at observational, some of your observational data, you know, do you see that students are asking more questions? Do you see that they're more engaged? You know, understand what those indicators are. And you are going to be the expert on what these pieces are. We're not. I'm happy to talk through with you what some of them may be, but I want you to have the confidence that, you know your work, and you're going to be the expert on what these pieces are. Oftentimes you may have, you'll see in our application, we ask for up to 3 different sets, if you will, of output, outcome, and measures of success. Only one's required, but there are some folks that like to put all 3 in. We used to have it as 5, and we've cut it down a little bit to be able to make the application a little simpler for you. And certainly, and especially sometimes when you're thinking about general operating support versus program support, it may be that you have different outputs and outcomes for one activity. And this is just an example to show you and to walk you through that. Oops. Excuse me. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. And then the measures of success. This is really, what are the tools that you're going to be using to be able to understand with your data, how has a change occurred? Is that change an improvement? We have a bridge here because you want to think about those tools and those indicators being the way to walk from the work that you're doing to the change that you're looking to see. How are you going to know that that has taken place? And I want to, this may be a bit basic for some folks, but I just wanted to get back to some of the basics when we think about data and we think about the quantitative data and the qualitative data. And certainly at times the quantitative data can be in some cases, the easiest to collect. This is your number, this is your counts. This is going to answer, who, what, when, and where. And your tools here, of course, when you have survey questions that are closed-ended, you're asking people how many hours they did a certain activity after you provided their programming. This may be grades, this is attendance. And this is often then connected certainly to your outputs in your application. It can at times be connected to your outcomes. And then on the flip side is your qualitative data. And this is more descriptive. This is what can be observed. This is the why and the how. And this is often your stories, really. And your tools here are your interviews, focus groups, when you have survey questions, when you have your questions that are open-ended, and your observational research. And this is where you're looking at behavior changes. And I think that oftentimes this is where many of us want to go, but we're not sure how to go there. And I'm welcome any questions on this and spending time with folks to talk through simple methods of, if you are doing a program that you are providing educational programming, for example, is it then that your teachers or your providers that are with the students are, keeping journals, who are, observing some of these key indicators that you have thought about? You want to think about, when you think about indicators, you want to think about, okay, what can you see in terms of measuring it? What can you hear? What can you observe? And these things don't necessarily have to be complicated, nor does it have to be something that you apply to the entire population which you're serving, because that just wouldn't be realistic. You can bring in small groups and you can bring in small pieces to try to understand your learning and then take that out to a larger group. And here I took the liberty of sharing from Genesis House some of the work that they had done, because I thought that it really fit nicely with what we were doing here in terms of, and this is taken directly from their application, in terms of an output. And of course, you have the measurable pieces here. The aftercare coordinator is going to have 9 gatherings. They've quantified the number of participants. You could go further and talk about, the geographic locations that you're doing that, or perhaps the age range that they're seeing, but this output is a very solid output. But what I really love here is the outcome, and they have laid out here part of the behavior that they're looking to see, and which is essentially moving from independence to an abusive relationship. And what are those indicators? So the indicators are the social support, that the folks who are coming are going to feel closer to Genesis House, that they will have some of this formal social support. What's the behavior? And I would perhaps, looking at this now, there may be a knowledge piece that we ought to add into here as well. So what's the knowledge or education that you're looking to impart? And then what's the behavior that you're looking to change? And then on the right-hand side, the measure of success, in talking about through the conversations, talking about through feedback, and through formal surveys. And I'd say that this is a great example, but I think sometimes we can also learn from things that that we get kind of confused on. So this one is mine. This is from no one. Nobody has submitted this. But when I look at this one certainly doesn't necessarily follow the same patterns that other one. And there's a couple red flags when I put this together. And that is certainly in my output that I've put on here. This is pretty general. I haven't quantified this whatsoever. I haven't said how many folks, or even in, and I don't want people to get hung up on, here's a magic number we have to hit. You can certainly have a range there, but I haven't said how many people. I haven't said from what school district. I haven't said how many hours. I haven't quantified it. And then when I look over here at my measures of success, well, sure, I may think that this would be successful if I do this, but that's not my measure of success. That's really my outcome. The fact that I want the majority of these students to be able to identify these particular concepts, that's my behavior. That belongs in my outcome. I may have some of these education pieces that I want my students to be able to understand and impart to them. And then what's the behavior I want to change? That's in my outcome. And so my measure of success, truthfully, I don't even have it on this page, because my measure of success may be a test score. It may be that we take a focus group from a small subset of the students. It may be that the teacher or the education provider is doing some journaling and we have determined what these concepts are ahead of time. Those would be the measures of success, which quite frankly, I didn't have at all in my trio here as I've laid it out for you. And finally, then I'm looking to hear from you, and I certainly wanted this to be a conversation, certainly one-on-one conversations, is that I again want people to understand that we are looking at this as a learning process. We are turning the lens at ourselves as well as the community foundation, and even questioning, okay, well, how have we done things, and what have we done that perhaps was the way that things have always been, and in some cases that's serving us well, in other cases, is it serving us as well as it could? We look to our community of practice to see what other community foundations are doing, to see what other foundations that may not be community foundations are doing. We are presenting some of these results when we're doing our deep dive and our analysis to our board and to our grants committee and to our stakeholders. And I have to say that our board is completely embracing this work and completely having an open mind about, okay, well, where do we do things differently, and how can we help? How can we help our grantees? How can we see people as partners? How can we be able to establish that trust? So I want to give you that that confidence, essentially. And I didn't really see any comments come into the chat box, but I want to open it now. If anybody wants to put anything in the chat box or take yourself off mute, please, now is the time.
This is Lisa with TechCore. I'll jump in, Jamie.
Thank you.
So appreciate the presentation, and outputs always, I feel like I always have to have my cheat sheet when I'm writing. So would you be available to chat through, like, before we submit our next, proposal? Are you able to kind of just have a conversation with us in the same way?
Absolutely, Lisa. And I have done that with several of our partners, and absolutely, I would welcome that conversation. And then what I hope is then that's not the end of the conversation, that we talk through that, because you're right, there at times it can be confusing. What's an output? What's an outcome? It can be even confusing when you think about what's a goal and what's a strategy. Sometimes I really have to step back to think about that. And I think sometimes there's value in talking with someone who is not as close to your work as you are. Sometimes when we're in the middle of it, it can be confusing. So yes, I absolutely want to have those conversations in advance of you submitting your application. And then my hope is that then we're touching base throughout the program to understand, okay, how is, your data collection going? What other resources that we could help provide, even outside of grant making? And certainly as the program comes to a conclusion, but we don't simply want this to be something that we're talking about at the front end when we're applying and at the back end at the report. We want to be having that conversation as you're delivering your programs, so that we can know, okay, is this going in the direction that we need it to go? How can we change things? Where do we learn for next time? So thank you, Lisa. And my fault, I didn't put my contact information on here, and I apologize because that's a big miss, but I am at the Community Foundation. You're pretty easy to find on the website, so please.
It's in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, this is Holly Brenda. Are you going to be posting your slides, and could you possibly provide access to some best practice logic model examples so that we've got more than one example to look at? That always
Sure.
helps.
Absolutely, Holly. Yes, we are a couple of things. We are recording this today because there were a handful of folks who had conflict who couldn't be here. So we're going to be then posting this onto our website, 1. 2, we can get you some of the worksheets that would be ready for you then to fill out your logic model. And absolutely, yes, there are different, all logic models have the same bones, if you will, or framework, but we could certainly provide some good examples and sort of best practices for you. And I'll think about what's the best way to do that, whether that's putting that on our website or whether that, all of you are in our grants system and we could batch that and get that out to everybody. So thank you, Holly. That's a good question.
Right. Thank you.
If anyone is looking for Jamie's email address, it's in the chat, but you can always go to our website. In the top bar, at the top of that page is a button called Learn. If you go to Learn, there is a drop-down menu. Look for our team and you'll see everyone's, all the staff emails there. Thank you.
Another, I don't know if this is a question, but another piece that I'll bring up is I was in a conversation with somebody recently, and we were working together, and I think there can be a hesitation of, well, wait a minute, I don't have something in a pretty form or something like that. And, we're absolutely not concerned about that. We are, we're at times collecting paper, we're collecting things and we're just putting it into Excel. And I'm happy to work with folks through that process as well. So please don't in any way think that to mean certain organizations that we work with, and I will call on and compliment Second Harvest as we worked with them last year. Well, certainly they have, as you would imagine, software. They have a program called Pantry Track that they help to track that. We are certainly aware that not all of our partners are going to have the luxury of having that, and that's just fine. And we want to work with everybody equally there. Okay, well, I am going to, with some of, I'm going to give folks a little bit more time to think about questions, but while I have the floor, I'm going to give you a little bit of a commercial for some of our events and activities that we have coming up that hopefully are on your calendar. And the first one is basically on May 21st. We, in conjunction with BVU, will be presenting a strategic planning webinar. That's in the morning from 9 to noon. The beginning of June, June 5th, we will be hosting, our African-American Community Fund will be hosting Spark Tank. This is for organizations that are working to improve the African-American community, and Spark Tank is sort of built on the idea of Shark Tank, if you will. And that's from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. That will be virtual. Our annual meeting is coming up June 16th. That will be at noon, and that will be virtual and in person. And then following that on the 17th, in advance of Juneteenth, our African-American Community Fund will be hosting Black History Trivia, and that will be in the evening. And all of these events you could find on our website. If you're interested, we would ask for you to register, or certainly give us a call if you have any other questions about them.
Thank you, Jamie. So the deadline to apply for the African American Community Fund Spark Tank is May 17th. And when you log in, that should show up in available grant applications for you.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind me asking, what's the website again?
peoplewhocare.org.
Thank you very much, and sorry about the background noise. I'm at home.
So you're fine. No worries.
Just out of curiosity, will you be doing a deep dive into the arts and culture sector as part of your annual deep dives?
I think it's quite likely. I don't think that we have outlined yet what it's going to be for 2022. But when we look at the different areas that we cover in Lorain County, we look at it as health and human services, excuse me, education and youth development, arts and culture, and then what we call strengthening Lorain County. So my sense is that in the 2022, certainly this will need to be approved by the board, but my sense is that in 2022, it's probably going to be a combination of arts and culture and the strengthening the Lorain County piece.
Thank you.
So if there are organizations who are interested in doing that deep dive, certainly reach out to us and let us know.
Well, that wasn't so scary after all, was it?
It's all good.
So thank you for joining us. I would just like to be able to close. This is Cindy Andrews as the President and CEO of the Community Foundation. We thank you all for your support. And I think as Linda and Jamie highlighted, this is a learning experience for all of us. As we celebrate our 40+ years in philanthropy, we continue to look for best practices. But I do want to close by saying we also welcome your feedback. And so in addition to providing the slides, we will have a feedback survey. And the only way we can continue to support our community is through working our strategic plan, the input that you provide to us, as well as the opportunity that we have to continue to learn from all of you. You certainly know your work, you know the work that you're doing in the community. So we appreciate that feedback. And then lastly, as we continue to look at our work in diversity, inclusion, and equity, we are supporting through the Racial Equity Institute an upcoming REI workshop. Some of you have attended this in the past. If you have not, we have about a half dozen seats left for our June 30th and July 1st workshop. It is via Zoom, yet it does require a 2 full-day commitment. Some of you may be saying, I can't imagine doing this work via Zoom for 2 full days. But for those of you who have already done this, you'll nod your head and agree that it was very impactful. And even via Zoom, you were able to do this. The REI workshops are sold out through calendar year 2021. And this will be the last workshop we host for this year, certainly working with all of our partners and looking at our own Lorain County Racial Equity Center. But that information too is available on our website. And if you're interested, please let Britt know in our office, beloveit@peoplewhocare.org. She's our communications officer. So Linda, thank you. Jamie, thank you. I know Missy has also joined us. Missy is helping us with some of our data on the back office side. Linda, anything else before we let folks get back to their day?
Yes, so I had a question on chat about the strategic planning. It's on May 21st. And someone said he registered but did not get the Zoom information. So let me look into that, but I'm guessing, Cindy?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that will all go out, I suspect, on Monday or Tuesday of next week. The preference has been to do that so it doesn't get buried in folks' email. Jamie, have you seen anything else on that?
No, I would say the same thing, Cindy.
But as always, if you don't get the link that week, reach out to one of us. Call, email, drop in, whatever works for you. Okay.
So as Linda says, drop in from a post-pandemic. Can we actually say post-pandemic, given all the governor's announcements? Safety and security continues to be a priority for all of us. And our office is staffed Monday through Thursday. And so we certainly welcome folks, and especially those that have been vaccinated. But we appreciate the opportunity. Linda, anything else in the chat?
No, let's see. Missy just added something. Missy, are you here? Can you just say a little bit about what you just posted?
Oh, I was just saying, I did put the link in the chat if anybody would like to register for the strategic planning or the Spark Tank and so forth. That link will take you directly to the list of all of our events. The equity training, however, that Cindy mentioned is sort of by invitation only. It's not open to the public. So to register for that event, please email Britt, who is our communications officer, at beloveit@peoplewhocare.org. And I put that in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. So I'm in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but always available by email. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you for all of this.
We'll stay on the line too. If you have any individual questions, feel free to stay on.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
You guys have a
Well.
good day as well.
Thank you.
Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you.
Cindy will.
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Can I ask?
Yeah, I was just gonna say to Cindy, I'll take those cookies next time she comes by. Natalie, nice to see you. Sure, go ahead.
See you. Could you talk about a little bit about the equity training or
Yeah, the Racial Equity Institute, otherwise called REI, is out of North Carolina. And they do 2-day workshops looking at just some historical conversations, how we got to where we are. It has been very impactful, Natalie. We hosted the first one, I want to say last year. And then last October, and then hosted another one earlier this year, and then did a Latinx version in the March, April timeframe. So it's a 2-day session, June 30th, July 1st, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. both days, requires full attendance both days, and also just active participation. And I say that in the sense that to the person, Natalie, folks that have attended have walked away with some learning, some thoughts, knowledge that they didn't have before. The organizations out of North Carolina, we're looking to bring some of those practices right here to Lorain County. And so we have a team that's coming together around housing, health, education, our legal system, police, just this morning around economic development. So we continue to use equity as the center of our work and our planning from a community foundation. And again, Britt would be welcome to take your email if you're interested in joining us. Again, it's beloveit@peoplewhocare.org. Once the session is full, we'll take a backup list, as we know sometimes people have things that come up at the end. But we're really looking forward to hosting it again, June 30th and July 1st.
Wonderful. Thank you. I will email Brett, and if I have to check my calendar first to make sure that I'm
Oh,
available
sure.
from 9 to 5. That's a commitment.
It
but I
is a
think
commitment.
I think it sounds like a great program and it's something I'm interested in.
Well, we'll look for your email, Natalie. Thank you for the clarifying question also.
Thank you so
So
much.
Natalie was in our December newsletter.
Oh,
Replay for kids.
oh,
Yeah.
very nice.
Yes, and
Very
we
familiar with it, Natalie. Thank you for that great work.
thank you. And we have our toy adapting lending library set up at Avon Lake, and it's done really, really well. So I noticed there were a few people that were from the Lorraine Library that were on the call today, and I wrote their names down, and I'm going to contact them just to see if they're interested in possibly expanding to other libraries.
I think Anastasia would welcome your email, so.
Okay.
And Natalie, I don't know if you know, there's also a consortium of Lorraine County librarians. They meet once a month, probably via Zoom, but
Oh,
usually about a dozen folks that gather. And I know I've visited with them a couple of times, and that might be another audience for you to get in front of.
that would be really wonderful. If I could get that information of the person that's in charge of that, if you could just email it to me, that'd be fantastic.
You know what? I think it rotates, but I think Natalie could tell you, or the woman from Avon or Avon Lake. I know the director is a gentleman, but the assistant director had been involved. So either of those two folks, I'm sure, could tell you who the current chair is, but
Wonderful.
it's Lorraine County Association of Librarians.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna have a wonderful weekend.
Be well.
Thanks.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Did we have any other questions?
Nothing here from Stacy. I just enjoyed listening, so thank you very much.
Oh, Stacy,
Okay.
thanks for joining us.
Drive
Thank
safe,
you.
Stacy. Take care.
Thank you. I sure will. Appreciate it.
Patty, be well.
Bye.
And Paris might just have us saved on her screen, so.
Sure, right.
So
Okay.
we will stop the recording. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your morning. Be well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jamie. Thanks,
Bye.
Cindy.
Sure.
Thanks, Missy. Bye.